The sky over Baghdad splits open at 2 a.m. A sound no one outside a war zone has ever heard. Not gunfire, not a detonation. A loud, sustained roar, a mechanical scream that echoes across the entire compound. 4,500 rounds per minute. 75 rounds every second. Tracer rounds drawing a white-hot curtain from the ground straight up into the night sky, converging on a single point. You can barely see a dot, a shadow. Something small and cheap carrying enough explosive to put hundreds of lives at risk in seconds. The CRAM fires for 3 seconds, maybe 4. The drone ceases to exist. Fragments rain down onto concrete blast walls. And then silence. Not peaceful silence. The silence of everyone inside the international zone holding their breath, wondering if there's a second one. Because there's always a second one. The CRAM is the last weapon between an incoming threat and the people it's about to reach. Not the first layer of defense, the last. When everything else has failed intelligence, patrols, counter-battery radar, diplomacy, this system has between 3 and 7 seconds to decide if something in the sky is a threat, and then neutralize it. What you're about to understand is how a weapon designed to protect Navy ships from Cold War anti-ship missiles ended up bolted to a trailer in downtown Baghdad, firing into a city of 7 million people, and why the thing that makes it so controversial isn't the rounds going up, it's the rounds coming down. Iraq, 2004. The insurgency isn't a guerrilla war anymore, it's a rocket war. Iranian-backed militias are launching 107mm Katyusha rockets and 60mm mortars into the green zone from neighborhoods across the Tigris. The strikes come at night. They come at dawn. They come during lunch. Forward operating bases across Iraq are getting hit daily. Camp Victory, Balad Air Base, the U.S. Embassy compound. Soldiers eating breakfast hear the alarm, incoming, 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 and have seconds to reach a concrete bunker. The rockets aren't precision weapons. A 107mm Katyusha has a CEP of roughly 300 to 500 meters. That means half the rockets land within 500 meters of their aim point, and the other half land wherever gravity wants them. But it doesn't matter. The green zone is dense. Every rocket that clears the river has a chance of hitting something, a barracks, a vehicle, someone walking between buildings. Between 2004 and 2010, indirect fire claimed over 40 U.S. service members in Iraq and wounded hundreds more. The military calls it IDF, indirect fire. The soldiers called it something else. They called it lottery. Because there was no skill involved, no tactic, no cover that mattered. A rocket either had your name on it or it didn't. The U.S. military had spent decades building weapons to neutralize tanks, shoot down jets, destroy bunkers. It had nothing designed to take down a $300 rocket in midair over a city. And that gap was costing lives every week. The solution came from the ocean. The Phalanx CIWS close-in weapon system had been protecting Navy ships since 1980. A 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon mounted on a radar-guided turret. 6 barrels, 4,500 rounds per minute. The entire system was autonomous. It tracked incoming missiles, calculated intercept points, and fired without human input. Sailors called it R2D2 because of the white radome on top that looked like the droid's head. The Navy trusted it enough to let it shoot over their own flight deck. The Army looked at Phalanx and asked a question that sounded insane. Can we put this on land? Can we bolt a naval weapons system to a trailer, park it inside a city, and use it to intercept rockets and mortar rounds out of the air? The engineering problems were enormous. On a ship, the ocean is your backstop. Rounds that miss fly into open water. In Baghdad, rounds that miss fly into apartment buildings. The M61 fires depleted uranium or tungsten penetrators designed to punch through missile casings. On a ship, spent rounds fall into the sea. In a city, they fall onto rooftops, streets, vehicles. A 20 millimeters round weighs about 100 grams. At 4,500 rounds per minute, a 3-second burst sends 225 rounds into the air. Every single one of those rounds has to go somewhere. Raytheon and the Army modified the system. They replaced the armor-piercing rounds with Heat-SD high-explosive incendiary tracer, self-destruct. Each round was programmed to self-destruct after a set distance if it didn't connect, fragmenting into pieces small enough that they'd lose energy before reaching the ground. That was the theory. The system was renamed CRAM, Counter-Rocket Artillery and Mortar. First unit deployed to Camp Victory, Baghdad, November 2004. It was the fastest weapons development program since World War II. 3 weeks after deployment, a 60 millimeters mortar round arced over the perimeter wall headed for the base dining facility. The CRAM's radar acquired it in flight. The system calculated an intercept solution in under 2 seconds. The turret slewed, locked, and fired. The mortar round was destroyed in mid-air, 200 meters short of the DFAC. Soldiers inside heard the CRAM's roar, then nothing. No impact, no detonation on the ground. The round just disappeared from the sky. The dining facility was full, over 300 people. But the celebration lasted about a week, because the military had just introduced something into urban combat that raised a question nobody wanted to answer. The self-destruct rounds weren't perfect. Heat-SD was designed to fragment at a preset distance. But fragmentation isn't evaporation. Pieces of the round casing, incendiary material, unexploded fragments still fell. A 3-second burst at 4,500 revolutions per minute puts 225 rounds in the air. Even if 95% fragment as designed, that leaves 11 rounds that might not. And even the ones that fragment correctly send metal shards across a wide area. In a desert FOB surrounded by empty sand, that's acceptable risk. In Baghdad, a city where 7 million people live within the engagement envelope, every burst creates a rain of debris over someone's neighborhood. Reports started filtering in. Iraqi civilians finding metal fragments on their rooftops, a vehicle with a punctured windshield, an unconfirmed report of fragments reaching a residential area after a CRAM engagement near the green zone. The military's answer was probability. The statistical risk of a self-destruct fragment causing civilian harm was lower than the risk of the incoming rocket reaching the base. The math made sense. But math doesn't matter when fragments from your defense system land on a family's roof at 3 inches the morning. And the threat was evolving faster than the defense. By 2006, militias had figured out timing. They'd fire rockets during peak hours when the DFAC was full. They used multiple launch points simultaneously, forcing CRAM to prioritize. They fired from densely packed Shia neighborhoods, knowing that even if the U.S. tracked the launch point, responding would risk civilian harm that would be worse than the rocket strike itself. The launch crews became ghosts. Set up the launcher on a timer, drive away, and the system fires itself 30 minutes later. By the time counter-battery radar traced the origin, there was nothing there but an empty tube and a car battery. Then came the real escalation. The rockets got better. Iranian 240 millimeters, Falak rockets with enough explosive to crater a parking lot. Chinese manufactured 107 millimeters rounds with improved propellant that gave less warning time. And the most dangerous development, coordinated strikes paired with IEDs. Launch rockets at the gate to trigger the base lockdown, then detonate a vehicle-borne IED at the choke point where vehicles stacked up trying to get inside. The CRAM was performing exactly as designed. Intercept rates climbed above 70% in some deployments, but 70% of 5 rockets means 1 or 2 get through, and 1 is enough. January 2020, Ain al-Assad Air Base. Iran launches ballistic missiles in retaliation for the Qasem Soleimani strike. These aren't Katyushas. They're Fateh 313 short-range ballistic missiles, each carrying a 450 kilograms warhead, traveling at Mach 3 plus. The CRAM was not designed for this. Its engagement envelope maxes out at mortar rounds and slow rockets. A ballistic missile moving at 3 times the speed of sound passes through the CRAM's engagement zone in a fraction of a second. The system never fired. Over a dozen missiles struck the base. No Americans were lost because they'd been evacuated hours earlier based on intelligence, but the infrastructure damage was catastrophic. The CRAM sat there, barrels cold, watching threats it was never built to fight. That night exposed the core truth about the system. The CRAM is a last resort, not a solution. It exists in the gap between warning and impact, and that gap was getting smaller every year. By 2020, the rockets were no longer the primary problem. The drones were. Iranian-supplied one-way attack drones, loitering munitions, technically started appearing over U.S. positions in Iraq and Syria. Small, slow, cheap. The Shahed 136, later made globally famous in Ukraine, costs an estimated $20,000 to $50,000 per unit. A delta-wing design with a small warhead and a lawnmower engine. It doesn't fly fast. It doesn't need to. It flies low, follows GPS waypoints, and dives into its target. For the CRAM, drones created a problem that rockets never did. A 107mm rocket follows a ballistic arc, predictable, calculable, fast. The radar sees it, the computer calculates where it'll be in 1.5 seconds, and the gun fires at that point. A drone doesn't follow a ballistic arc. It maneuvers. It can change direction. It can approach low and slow, under the radar threshold, and pop up for the terminal dive at the last moment. The CRAM's fire control was designed for ballistic math point A to point B in a parabola. Drones don't do parabolas. And there's a worse problem: cost asymmetry. A CRAM burst of 200-plus rounds of HEIT-SD ammunition costs somewhere between $30,000 and $60,000, depending on the estimate. The drone it's shooting at costs less than the ammunition used to bring it down. An adversary with 50 drones and a budget under $2 million can force the U.S. to spend $3 million in CRAM ammunition alone, not counting barrel wear, maintenance, and the rounds that miss. At scale, the defender goes bankrupt before the adversary runs out of drones. This isn't theoretical. In October 2023, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria launched over 80 drone and rocket strikes on U.S. positions in a single month. Bases were getting hit multiple times per week. Al-Tanf garrison in Syria, Ain al-Assad, Erbil, the Green Zone. CRAM systems were firing constantly. Videos from military footage channels showed the white tracer streams cutting through the night sky over Baghdad, the distinctive burr audible from miles away. The soldiers on those bases describe a specific kind of dread. The alarm sounds. You hear the CRAM spin up. You hear it fire. And then you wait. If you hear the intercept in the air, the drone was neutralized. If the CRAM stops firing and you hear the impact on the ground, it wasn't. Some soldiers said the worst part wasn't the incoming. It was the silence between the CRAM stopping and finding out which way it went. Sound familiar? Vietnam veterans said the same thing about the silence after the minigun stopped. The technology changes. The human experience of being on the defended end of a last resort weapon hasn't changed in 60 years. Here's what the CRAM footage doesn't show you. What happens on the ground, inside the wire, during an engagement. A CRAM installation at a forward operating base in Iraq sits on a trailer behind concrete T-walls. The radar dome rotates constantly. The system is always on. When it detects an incoming threat, there is no human approval step. The system classifies the threat, calculates the solution, and fires. Autonomous. AS. 8. The engagement happens too fast for a human to be in the loop. Detection to firing is measured in single-digit seconds. The rounds leave the barrel at over 1,100 meters per second. The sound reaches everything within a mile radius. The people living inside that perimeter experience something specific. They learn the CRAM's sound the way infantry learn the minigun sound. The spin-up whine of the motor, then the full-throat roar. When it fires, you don't think. Your body has already decided what to do before your brain catches up. Some soldiers dove for cover. Some froze. Some, and this is the detail that rarely gets reported, some ran toward the sound, not because they were brave, because the CRAM's location was the one point they knew wasn't going to get hit. The system doesn't fire at itself. Standing under it felt safer than standing anywhere else, even though the debris from a successful intercept was falling directly overhead. Master Sergeant Kevin DeWitt, stationed at Baghdad in 2006, said in an interview that the CRAM changed the psychology of base defense. Before CRAM, incoming meant helplessness. All you could do was get low and hope. After CRAM, incoming meant somebody was fighting back. Even if the intercept failed, the fact that something was shooting at the threat changed how soldiers felt about being under fire. It gave them agency by proxy. Someone, something, was on their side. But that sense of protection came with a cost the soldiers didn't talk about publicly. The CRAM's autonomous engagement meant that the system could fire at any time, without warning, day or night. Soldiers on bases with CRAM reported chronic sleep disruption, not from the incoming from the defense. The system would engage threats that turned out to be false positives, birds, atmospheric anomalies, debris caught in wind. Every false engagement produced the same full-volume roar at 2 a.m., the same adrenaline spike, the same minutes of panic, followed by the slow realization that nothing was actually incoming. Sleep deprivation from defensive systems, that's not in any after-action report. But ask anyone who lived on a CRAM-defended FOB and they'll tell you, the thing that was keeping you safe was also keeping you from sleeping. And over a 1-2 month deployment, that compounds. Reaction times degrade. Decision-making suffers. Tempers shorten. The weapon that protected you was slowly wearing down the people it was protecting. The CRAM was never designed to fight drones. It was designed to fight what existed in 2004, unguided rockets and mortar rounds following gravity. 20 years later, the threat has evolved 4 generations, and the defense is still, fundamentally, a ship gun bolted to a truck. The U.S. military knows this. The response has been a frantic, layered defense approach. In 2023 and 2024, deployments to the Middle East started including directed energy weapons, high-energy lasers, that can take a drone out of the sky for roughly $10 per shot instead of $50,000. The Army's Indirect Fire Protection Capability Program is testing systems that combine radar, lasers, missiles, and electronic warfare into a single integrated package. The idea is that CRAM becomes one layer in a multi-layer system. Lasers handle the cheap drones. Missiles handle the fast ones. CRAM handles what's left. But there's a problem that technology can't solve. The adversary sets the pace. A militia with access to Iranian drone factories can produce hundreds of UAVs per month at under $50,000 each. The U.S. response, even the cheapest laser variant, costs millions per unit to develop, deploy, train on, and maintain in theater. Every new defense system takes 3 to 5 years from concept to deployment. A new drone variant takes months. The defender is always reacting. The adversary is always innovating. And the gap between a $300 mortar round and a $50,000 drone swarm is the gap between the wars the CRAM was built for and the wars it's fighting now. Ukraine proved this at scale. Russian forces adapted Iranian Shahed drones for mass strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure. Ukraine's air defenses, including systems far more sophisticated than CRAM, were being overwhelmed by sheer volume. The lesson was clear to every military planner watching. If you can be outproduced, you can be outfought, no matter how good your last wall is. In Iraq today, CRAM systems are still active, still firing, still drawing those white tracer lines across the Baghdad night sky that show up on military footage channels and get millions of views. The videos look striking from a distance. Up close, each tracer line represents a moment where the last layer of defense between an incoming weapon and the people behind it activated, and everyone within range had 3 seconds to find out if the system would hold. Tower 22, a small U.S. outpost in northeastern Jordan near the Syrian border, for the 28th of January, 2024. According to official reports, a one-way attack drone approached in the same corridor as a returning U.S. drone, confusing the base defense systems. The CRAM did not engage. The drone struck the living quarters. The subsequent investigation confirmed 3 U.S. soldiers were lost: Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, Specialist Brianna Moffett. Over 40 others were wounded. It was the first lethal drone strike on U.S. forces in the region during this campaign. The investigation into Tower 22 focused on the moments before impact, why the drone wasn't engaged, whether it was masked by the returning friendly UAV, whether the force protection posture was adequate. According to reports, the answers pointed to the fundamental limitation of every last resort defense. It requires perfect detection to achieve any interception at all. Miss the detection, and the gun never fires. The 3 soldiers lost at Tower 22 were asleep in their quarters. They never heard the alarm. They never heard the CRAM. They never got the 3 seconds. Veterans of CRAM-defended bases describe a psychological pattern that mirrors what minigun-era veterans reported, what grenadiers described, what door gunners lived with. The sound becomes embedded. Not the sound of the incoming, the sound of the defense. The burst of the Vulcan cannon at 3 a.m. becomes a sound that means both safety and danger simultaneously. You hear it, and your body floods with adrenaline because something is headed your way, and with relief because something is trying to stop it. And those 2 responses don't cancel each other out. They stack. Over months, over deployments, they compound into something that doesn't have a clean name in the VA paperwork. But every veteran of a FOB in Iraq from 2005 to 2024 recognizes instantly the sound of being defended, the sound of knowing it might not work, the sound of finding out in real time whether the last wall holds. The CRAM has intercepted hundreds of rockets, mortar rounds, and drones since 2004. The exact number is classified, but public reporting and unit accounts suggest the system has prevented dozens of mass casualty events on U.S. bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. It has saved lives that will never be counted because the threat that would have reached them was destroyed 4 seconds before impact at 200 meters altitude. But it was always a stopgap, a naval weapon pressed into a land war because nothing else existed. A system firing $50,000 bursts at $300 rockets and $20,000 drones in a cost equation that only works if you never run out of money. An autonomous gun in a city of 7 million people, raining self-destructing fragments onto neighborhoods that never signed up to be a backstop. Every military technology follows the same arc, built for one war, adapted for the next, overwhelmed by the one after that. The Gatling gun became the minigun, became the Vulcan, became the CRAM. The rotating barrels, the electric motor, the principle of overwhelming volume of fire, they're all still there, 160 years after Dr. Gatling's patent. The mechanism works. It's the world around it that keeps changing faster than the gun can spin. If you've watched footage of the CRAM firing at night over Baghdad, you've seen those white lines climbing into the sky and thought it looked almost surreal. Like a light show, like something out of a film. It isn't. Every one of those lines is a burst of 200 rounds fired in under 3 seconds at something small and cheap and dangerous that's about to arrive at a place where people are sleeping. And between the moment the system fires and the moment you find out if it worked, there's a gap, 1 to 3 seconds. The same gap the thumper grenadier felt between the thump and the crump. The same silence the infantry heard when the minigun stopped and the jungle hadn't answered yet. The technology changes, the gap doesn't. And the people living inside that gap, waiting to find out if the last wall held, they carry that silence home with them. The same way every generation before them did. And if you listen to the CRAM footage with headphones, past the roar, past the intercept, there's a moment right after where Baghdad goes quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The quiet of everyone inside the wire holding their breath, counting seconds, waiting to see if there's a second one. Because there's always a second one.